In today's episode, we're going to break down the 28-36 rule, the 50-30-20 rule, and we're going to also get into how to calculate what you and your family can afford based on your income.
Or your affordability.
Your affordability. So, Chris, you know, we actually know this, and we've talked about it on the show. We're not going to paint all real estate agents and brokers out to be villains.
You went off script already?
But no, this is this portion of the script. Unfortunately, people that don't know what they're doing, they usually get referred to real estate agents and brokers for advice on whether it's the right time to buy or not. Yep. And you and I both know what answer they get most of the time.
The best time to buy is now. It's always the right time to buy. As long as you can afford the payment, you should buy right now. Buy now.
Right. Exactly.
It is the mantra of most people in the real estate profession. And this is really, frankly, part of the macro problem with the real estate business. Real estate professionals typically get paid a commission on the higher loan amount or the higher sale price of a home. So in their mind, as values go up, you marry the home and you date the rate, right? So you're only temporarily dealing with the rate. And as rates go up and down, you change, you get lower rates. That's all well and good in a market that might be a little elevated or might have a little bit higher rates than normal. But when you got the average home price in the country at an all-time high of $434,000, and you got rates, mortgage rates above 7% on average, and you are at all-time unaffordability, all time, not just like the last couple of years, not the last decade, all time in history ever, okay? That mantra of like, oh, it's always a good time to buy, it kind of is a little tone deaf.
Right.
And I think we're seeing the pivot in the markets right now because the consumer is going, you know what? No, it's not a good time for me to buy. I can't afford it. This doesn't make any economic sense to me anymore.
Right.
And you're seeing the sales activity drop to some of the lowest numbers you've seen in 20 or 30 years in some cases.
Yeah, and we're definitely going to get into that at the tail end of the show. But first, what we want to get into is how can you calculate what you can actually afford? Because I think a key distinction here that a lot of people fail to recognize, especially if it's their first time or they don't have somebody that can mentor them through this process, is that what you can afford is completely different than what you actually qualify for, right?
Yeah, and I will say there is a bit of a realism element to this that I think is lost on people. Just because you go through the analytics that we're going to walk you through does not in and of itself mean that if you don't feel comfortable with that payment, you shouldn't do it. You'd be surprised how much home you can actually qualify for because of the way the qualification metrics work. They take a percentage of your income before and after overall expenses to look at how much you qualify for. And these metrics are rough estimates of what you should and shouldn't be paying in total cost for housing to you. But these rough estimates, they don't necessarily mean that you're going to feel comfortable with how much you are or are not paying, right? So if I come back and I say, you know what, Chris, I can afford a house payment, and it's always payment driven. It's not really off of, you back into the dollar amount of the home that you want to buy. It's payment driven, right? It's cash flow driven. We've always talked on the show about cash flow, and we'll walk into what a real life example of this looks like. But if you say, hey, I can't pay $10,000 a month for a mortgage payment, that's insane. I would only have $6,000 left, but you're telling me I qualify. That means you don't feel comfortable. That means you shouldn't buy the home, which means whether you qualify or not is irrelevant. You are the best gauge of whether or not that number makes sense to you. So to keep that in the back of your head as we go through this exercise.
Right. So one of the first rules that you'll find that's very common that people like to, suggest for you to follow, and it's a little gimmicky, right, is the 50-30-20 rule. Okay. Yeah. So we'll start there. Typically what they're saying is, 50% of your gross monthly income, that means everything before taxes, okay, gets paid towards your bills and your mortgage payment and things of that nature, right?
Yep.
Next is you got 30% that goes towards some of your wants, things that you want to buy, things that you want to spend money on, and 20% towards savings. Now, these are just rough estimates. People don't typically follow these estimates, and it swings in and out. But you should. It should be somewhat in line.
That's an ideal world. And let's be honest, we're not living in an ideal world.
Right.
With inflation taking cost of things 20, 30% up in the matter of a couple of years, and everything around us costing more, even as inflation slows, it's still going upward. You haven't seen any deflationary trends. For most Americans, that 20% ain't there. They're not saving. They don't have enough money to save. So you're seeing 50, 60, 70% towards the needs.
Yes.
And you're seeing maybe 20 or 30% left over for the wants in a best case scenario, and then zero left for the savings. In some places, in some people's cases, they're actually running cash flow negative, running up those credit card balances.
Right.
Right. And what do? They go to buy now, pay later services. So in that case, you're actually running at a cash flow negative because you're spending more than you make, and your needs are frankly causing you to go in debt.
Right. So, and also, so part of that 30% of, your wants, that's also in the savings, it's paying down some of your debt. So if you can't save, hurry up and get to the point where you can save, pay off your high interest credit card debt, and get to the point where you can start saving, right? But now we're going to get into the 28-36 rule. This is typically what, underwriters will begin to look at. It's known as the front end back end ratio, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the 28-36 rule, 28 represents 28% of your gross monthly income should be going towards your principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, right? So your mortgage payment, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And then the 36% rule is it also includes your housing needs of your principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and also all your credit card debts, your student loan debts, and your auto loan debts, and the rest. It's I think it's really interesting though that they do all this using gross income and it's before taxes,
Mm-hmm.
right?
I think the reason why originally is that taxes can vary a great deal state to state.
Mm-hmm.
So when you consider federal taxes, I guess it would probably be a more uniform way to do this. It would be a little more conservative. They just never did. So it is a gross number. So if you take your gross salary, let's say you make $100,000 a year, multiply it times 28%,
Right.
$28,000 a year, divide by 12 because there's 12 months in the year. That's what your mortgage payment. That's how much mortgage payment you should be paying on the front end. Now you might be saying, Chris, why do I have a front end and a back end ratio? Why do I need both? Because they want to know how much you have in debt, right? Because let's say you have a great front end ratio and you have tons of money and you can afford a property with a mortgage payment of $4,000 a month because you make tons of money, right? Well, if you got tons of debt and your back end ratio is above 36%, guess what? You don't make enough money to cover that mortgage payment on the front end and your existing debt, so you were considered a higher risk. So they're not going to give you a loan if your ratios are out of whack.
Right, and exactly. In the way they use the 28 front end ratio portion of that is the way they can also pre-screen the transaction, right? So if you come in, you're saying you want to apply for a home loan and you make X amount of dollars, but you don't even, if it's way above 28%, that the mortgage payment is more than 28% of your gross monthly income, they go, look, you're not going to qualify for that, so we can't even pre-qualify you. So let's not even go ahead and run your credit. Let's just save you the hassle. Right?
Yeah, and they can also, if you know off the top of your head what you pay every single month from a credit perspective, even if they don't pull your credit report, and 9 times out of 10 they do that these days in the front end anyway, then they're going to go, okay, this is how much you're paying every single month. This is what your car payment is, your student loan payment. This is what your credit card balances are kind of like. You're paying every single month. What's your minimum payments? Okay, great, it's this. They're going to figure out a rough estimate of what your back end is, and they're going to go, okay, this person's going to qualify, not going to qualify. What you might have come to from a conclusion perspective is for most of America, the back end ratio is the problem.
Yeah, the back end ratio is definitely the problem. And here's the thing, unfortunately for most people, a lot of times they're not going to stop you at the initial 28%. They're going to want to see, let's find a way to make this work, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like we said earlier, what you actually can afford is not the same for what you qualify. So you'll actually be able to qualify for much more, but this is to where, if you stick to that 28% of your gross monthly income going towards your PITI, your mortgage payment, right? That you can still live, I guess, somewhat comfortably if everything else is managed properly, right? So I think we should get into some examples so people can understand really what we're talking about here, and it'll bleed right into the show with the home affordability issues that we're seeing and how bad it's really gotten.
And I have a lot on this topic. It's of huge personal interest to me because I do think that it is the one thing we're not talking about enough and we're not raising enough awareness of, not only us, as a show and as a podcast, but certainly us as a society and the traditional media. We're just not focused on enough of the implications this has on people. And if you're listening to this 28%, 36% rule and you're going, wait a minute, if I make $100,000 per year and I take 28% of that on the front end, and that's how much I should afford towards principal, interest, taxes, and insurance.
$2,333.
$2,333. What home can you buy in America?
I'm going to get to that, and that's the one that I think is going to blow people away. So let's not take the rabbit out of the hat yet. Yeah. But Haroon, if you could do me a favor, please, can you Google mortgage calculator bank rate? This is what I use to come up with these figures in case anybody wanted to fact checked us or go through the motions themselves. These are some of the assumptions that were made to come to these figures. We assume that people applying would be getting a 30-year loan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, right now the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate is approximately 7%. Chris and I believe that it's probably going to go up from there. So, but for right now, it's at 7%. I only estimated a 10% down payment. So that also means you're probably going to have some PMI, right? Private mortgage insurance, which we'll get into. For property taxes, I estimated 1.25% of the home value. Okay, on average, it varies from state to state.
Yeah, if you're in Texas, you probably want to use something closer to 1.75, depending on what municipality you're in and stuff like that. But
yeah. And then other states might be lower, but this is somewhere like right in the middle, right? And then for home insurance, I average 0.7% of the home price. Okay, so this is what we got now. So for somebody that's making $60,000 a year, okay, slightly below the average income across the U.S. Okay, so what you would do there is you would divide that by 12 to figure out your gross monthly income. That comes out to $5,000. Okay, you take that figure and you times it by 28%. That leaves you with a mortgage payment of $1,400. Okay, what that means for somebody right now is that you would be able to afford, with a 7% mortgage rate, a home of $175,000.
The average home in the United States is currently at $434,000. Keep the average home.
The average home. So keep that in mind as we go through the rest of these examples.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if that same person that was making $60,000 was looking for a home at a time when mortgage rates were at, let's just say, 5%, they're now looking at a home that they can afford at $210,000.
Again, half of the average across the country. I keep harping on this because it's so compelling to me how unaffordable things are with honestly good old school traditional salaries. And it highlights one important thing we've talked about a lot on the show. Wages have not kept up with inflation, and that does include home inflation.
Yeah, absolutely. So next up on this is somebody making $70,000 a year. You take that gross monthly income of $5,800, essentially, right? That comes out to a mortgage payment that they can afford at $1,633. At a 7% mortgage rate, they can afford a home at $214,000.
Again, this also assumes you have the money to put down and you have savings to put down the mortgage payment as well.
Right. So, like I said, this is all assuming a 10% down payment, right? And I left a little bit of wiggle room for PMI. That's going to be based on their lender.
No, and I get you, but so there's so many hurdles here for the average American to buy their first home. Saving the money. At the top of the show, we talked 50, 30, 20. That's an ideal situation. Mm-hmm. Most people aren't saving the money. And even if you do save money, to put a down payment of 10% down on a $200,000 home, that's $20,000.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, and hopefully, you've already paid off the credit card debt in order to get that, right?
Yeah.
So, but for the individual that is making $70,000 a year, if they were looking to buy a home and mortgage rates were at 5%, they're looking at a home at $252,000. Okay, that's an increase of $40,000. So you're looking at it like, man, like this is why mortgage rates matter to people, right? But still well below the average home price across the nation. Next up, $80,000. Now we're talking somebody making more than the average income, for somebody making money across the nation. We're looking at a mortgage payment of $1,866 at a 7% mortgage rate. They can afford a home at $245,000. What does that tell you? The average income earner, more income than the average income earner across the nation can't afford an average home.
By $200,000.
By $200,000, double, right? Insane, man. With a 5% mortgage rate, they could afford a home for $275,000.
Yeah, these numbers are sad. You're trying to make everybody sad.
No, but this is what we're talking about. I don't think people understand unless they've actually gone through this process. We keep preaching home affordability is an issue. It's a real issue.
Haroon, are you sad too?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all sad now. Thank you.
Debbie Downer Saied.
Yeah,
Debbie but
totally ruin everybody's buzz.
No, but there's some good news coming after this, right?
I hope so.
We just had some bomb Mexican food.
I mean, yeah, we were having a bonding moment outside.
Some burritos, right?
Yeah, it was Burrito Tuesday.
All right, so for the income earner that's making $100,000 a year.
This is not the good news.
This is not the good news.
God damn it.
We tell people all the time on the show, you should be striving to make $100,000 a year.
Six figures should be the goal for everybody.
Right?
In today's world, and as sad as it sounds to be that delineated on a dollar amount, and I know we should all chase passions and do things we're happy with, you really need to make six figures.
Yeah, exactly.
You need to do that.
And if you don't have enough money to invest in the stock market like we've talked about on previous episodes, or look, and you're lucky enough to pay off all your student loan debt and your credit card debt, and you want to invest in something, invest in yourself. You know, take on some extra courses, do what else you need to do, you know, maybe pick up a side hustle, right? Like make some extra money. I mean, it doesn't all need to come from the same place.
Get your real estate license.
Get your real estate license.
You can't say that, dude. You
This
can't
guy-
even echo that.
This guy, how many times? He doesn't have his real estate license yet.
Yeah, neither do you.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't. You
So-
don't ever follow through with your promises to me.
For somebody that makes $100,000 a year, they would be able to afford a mortgage payment of $2,333 based on the 28% rule. At a 7% mortgage rate, you can afford approximately $305,000.
Wow. Can you get to the average anytime soon?
The average, no. We stopped right there.
Is that where we're stopping?
That's where we're stopping.
Yeah, you are.
Because
a
I
buzzkill.
feel like when I was doing my research for the show and I'm looking at some of the people that are making these videos, I'm like, this is kind of obnoxious. You're not even talking to the masses anymore.
So you're basically saying, as you write these down, the scenarios, you're like, okay, how can I end this in the most depressing note ever?
No, man. Because you have to be thoughtful when you're going about this. Because I also went down the rabbit hole of thinking there's a lot of hidden costs in owning a home too.
Lots.
That
yeah.
people, unless
repair and maintenance, man.
Repair and maintenance, we talk about all the time. Landscaping, that takes a huge chunk of your money.